real the beginning of Islam started. It's where Muhammad kind of trained and prepared to go back and take back Mecca, the very beginning of the history of the Islamic religion. Jerusalem, a founding of one of the founding places of so many religions. Three religions have holy sites there. It's a big deal. Baghdad is a place where there is a house of wisdom, so much cultural diffusion, so much learning going on there, which is obviously very nice. Baghdad, Timbuktu is a place started by Mansa Musa, who's the big king in Western Africa. Rome and Delhi. Delhi is the capital of India. Sahara Desert and the Himalayan mountains. You also need to know the Abbasid and Umayyad dynasties were in the Islamic Empire will be very important. The Abbasid was the Golden Age. Think Golden Age on that one. West African kingdoms and trading states. Be a big deal to know, and East African trading states will be something you want to know. So here's other ways you can study. Review the lessons and the notes. Study vocab terms from the homework. The biggest thing is fill in those connection columns in the homework. It fires the neurons up in your brains. It's a big part of recommendations. Study the map. You must have gotten some kind of practice map to fill back in. You can annotate and fill back in. And another thing is, do not reread the textbook, but the online textbook has good review materials, interactives, quizzes, videos, stuff like that you can watch to prepare. Practice multiple choice questions. Review on the history website, historyteacher.net. You can find a study buddy. And you can make your own study guide or graphic organizer or podcast like I'm doing now. Web charts would be a good organizer for this unit. And you can turn off your phone, but except for, of course, when you listen to this podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. You already know what it is. It is the Global Review Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, and today we have to start with a few things. First, obviously, we will be talking about the Renaissance. Then we're going to be moving on to the Protestant Reformation. That's our most recent sect of Unit 6 as we prepare the Unit 6 Protestant Reformation / Renaissance quiz. And, of course, we have to start off with the Middle Ages. This was before all of this happened, and they had some three concrete set values. Family. You got to stay close as a familial unit. Everyone's together. Everyone is functioning kind of with the family and not much else. You don't have much of a social life other than your family, which is a little bit strange to think about at this time. Also, another big thing was protection. You need protection. There was a lot of war. There was a lot of fighting going on. You need protection from lords, which obviously took shape in the form of feudalism. And then, of course, religion came along, and Christianity and the church was a very big thing. Now, in the Renaissance, there were some pretty big new values, and those values were swish. This is going to be a very important thing to understand for this upcoming test. And SWISH is an acronym, obviously, for SWISCH, and the first of those two S's being secularism. Enjoying non-religious values, very, very important. Because a lot of times people were so worried about pleasing God and not going to hell. So they didn't really have a lot of time to live their life the way they wanted. They didn't have time to go out, do things, explore, whatever they wanted to do. And secularism was kind of the idea of enjoying non-religious values and living your life kind of in a non-religious way. Wealth was also very important as trading and banking increased, creating a merchant class, which is also coincidentally enough the sign of a successful and powerful, good society. All right, so individualism is it's the I in SWISH. Individualism and their individuals and their talent were celebrated. It was all about their talent, and if they had a lot of talent, they were kind of put up on a pedestal and kind of exalted in a way. And also, it was all about, through art, was about capturing the individual human form. For studies, there was a huge value on learning and education in society, which is also a pretty cool thing. You had a lot of status if you were educated and you knew your stuff. If you knew your stuff, you could get a bigger or a better job. Like, for example, if you're a priest, you had to be able to understand and read Latin, and that required, boom, an education. Wow. That's pretty mind-blowing. Anyway, another big thing was classicism. And that was all about rediscovering old learning, like Latin and Greek culture and art and architecture. There's a big thing. Building like things like how the Greek built Colosseums. They had amazing architecture. That was really quite something, and it was something that they wanted to emulate down there in Italy. So they really rediscovered that. They kind of dug back through the old treasure troves of Roman and Greek society, and they also learned Latin, which is the language of the Roman Empire. So finally, humanism. It's about celebrating the individual achievements of humans and also being for the betterment of the human society. And those are the main values of the Renaissance. You may wonder, what is the Renaissance? It's probably something you should probably understand because it's a big part of our unit. Renaissance was the rebirth of the society that had been decimated by the fall of the Roman Empire. It was all about bringing back the empire to its old original prominence. It was a time of resurgence or rebirth for art, learning, and sophisticated culture. People had more money. There was more money flowing around. There was more trade. There was more like a merchant class. There was more power, and people were just happier. They were in a better place. They had a better quality of life, and that kind of society arose again in a time period from 1400s to 1700s called the Renaissance. That's when everything was busy coming back to normal once again. So one of the main things about the Renaissance is, you may know, it did in fact begin in Italy, and one of the major reasons for that was trade. There was more trade. There was more kind of center of commerce going on there, because the thing with Italy, as I'm sure you are all aware, it's shaped kind of like a boot, so you know what and who is passing. Like you can get people from North Africa, you can get people from Russia coming down. Maybe even if I look at the map, there is just kind of people from the Ottoman Empire, people from Spain, people from France. It's such a trading post, which will have more money to flow into it, and that increase the merchant class, which is, as I said before, kind of makes a society function a little bit better when they have a strong, good middle class. Also, there was a lot of power there. The papal states were there. They're the papal states. The Pope was there, obviously in Vatican City, so that was another big thing. And there was also some pretty major technological advancing going on, and a strong desire for learning, power, and to reclaim, as I said before, classicism, kind of reclaiming some of the Greek culture. All right, so also now I do want to get into some of the major artists of the Renaissance time. There are people like Raphael. He painted the picture of the School of Athens in the Apostolistic Palace in the Vatican City. That was a big thing with a lot of values there. It kind of represented classicism because of, again, it was Athens, and there was all that Athens kind of architecture there. That was another big thing that was pretty prevalent in that particular picture. And of course, obviously, how could we forget Michelangelo with the iconic Last Judgment, where we have it's the one where God is reaching over, touching man, kind of representing individualism and kind of the celebration of man, humanism also in a way, but also kind of making sure that he portrays man and God as kind of a level playing field, that God is accessible to man. They can reach out and kind of touch each other in that way, where if you're not getting what I'm talking about here, it's a picture where God is sitting on the red thing. He's reaching out and he's touching man, or a man who's sitting down on kind of what looks like a strange lily pad in a way, but who knows what it is. They're kind of just touching out there. And that is another big thing, and that's in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican City. It's a pretty big. These people, they were paid for by patrons. Their art was paid for by patrons, and it was to benefit the society and to make things look better, and kind of the betterment of humans and the lifestyle and the success of humans, which obviously is humanism. Then there's that's Michelangelo, but there was also Leonardo da Vinci with his iconic painting Mona Lisa, which really captured the form of the human in such a very intricate way. It made it look like a photograph before those were even invented. That was another big thing he did, and he was another one of those big artists. So there's also Brunelleschi and Botticelli, who also utilized this. Some of these same principles, these Swiss values in their artwork. As as time passed, the Renaissance spread from Italy to the north. The Northern Renaissance began, and it began in quite a way. It spread to the Holy Roman Empire, which is like Germany. It spread to England. Shakespeare took place during the Renaissance, which kind of makes sense, right? Because the learning, the spread of writing going on. I mean, he was considered one of the best writers ever, so it does make sense that he took a trip across the English Channel and headed to England. Also spread to places like Spain and France as well. So that learning spread north and became a whole another thing in the Northern Renaissance. And the Northern Renaissance kind of spread into Christian humanism. We'll get into that in a moment. But some of the main inventions were the printing press. It was a big deal, and it was invented by Johannes Gutenberg in 1440. The big deal with that was because he could print books quicker and faster. The printing press could. It allowed books to be made more quickly. Books and the whole idea of writing and transmitting ideas through literature took on kind of really a whole new meaning to the fact because there was still some pretty important things that were said to be written in that book. For example, the Bible. More people were able to get a Bible that they never would have before. Books that were told you more about the world were circulated quicker. I mean, all this important literature circulated very quickly. I mean, Shakespeare benefited most likely from the printing press. He was a 1500s man. It was 1440, so the printing press probably circulated a lot for him. And that was a big help for Shakespeare, as you can imagine. Well, we talked about the printing press, and that obviously led to the circulation of more books, and books that included The Prince. The Prince was by Machiavelli. He was kind of the first political strategist in the world, which is pretty cool. He advised some princes, and he came out with a big book called The Prince. And The Prince was a kind of a landscape-changing book, kind of changed the game, because it argued something different than anyone else had argued before. Everyone else before, unless they had some other kind of rough ulterior motive, had always argued that it would be better to rule by being nice and being chill. But Machiavelli, he wanted it to be ruled by fear. That way people were more obedient. People feared what you were going to do more, obviously. Yeah, pretty much what you need to know is you think of Machiavelli and you know that rule by fear is better. That's the argument he made in The Prince. There was also Christian humanism that kind of sprung out from the Northern Renaissance, and it was all about improvement there in Christian humanism. It was about values and purposes that included improving the church, improving the morals of the church, something that a lot of people in the north believed that the church, the Vatican, had abandoned. We'll get more of that in the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther, as I'm sure you are familiar with. Martin Luther, he was big into reforming the church, and he kind of represented that. He also wanted to improve lives as well. On top of that, improve living conditions. That's where the humanism part comes up in the Christian humanism part. Some of the similarities between the Northern Renaissance and the one down in Italy is that they both believed in humanism in their different ways. And in addition, art was very prevalent. Some of the major artists in the Northern Renaissance, we already went over the ones in the Italian Renaissance, were Durer. He wrote he created the painting Peasants in the Field, and The Last Supper by Albrecht. These Northern Renaissance paintings had a reputation for being kind of darker and less full of life and color, etc., because things weren't as poppin', just to say the least, over there. They weren't off the chains like they were in Italy at the time. So, art was prevalent in both societies, though, and both wanted some societal improvements, as we see in humanism. They want to improve, they want to better their society. Some of the differences was that Italy focused more on rebuilding classic cultures of Greek and Rome. They wanted to rebuild those cultures, and they also wanted to add to the church artistically and give it some more power. But in the north, they were focused on stamping out the corruption of the church, and the big thing they wanted was more morals along with that. They wanted to add, Italians wanted to add artistically. They wanted to reform the church. And that brings us in to the